All right, guys. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time joining this session about a text file. That's all we're going to do. 75 minutes, text files. But we will configure this text file to do magic. My name is Johan. This is Michael. We'll be your host for 75 minutes. And rather than telling everybody what we normally do for a living, we actually created a video instead. So that's also very useful when the kids ask what you do for a living or family does it. You can simply say it's on YouTube. Check it out. That's us. Pretty much sums it up.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. PowerPoint, please.
Oh, PowerPoint. That's number 4. There you go.
Beautiful. Next slide, please.
Okay, I can do next slide.
So this session is customizing OSD, and we will change between Light Touch and Config Manager all times because everything that we do is exactly the same. So yes, because we sometimes do demo in Light Touch, you can do exact same in Config Manager and vice versa. So how many are using Config Manager in the room? I would say about 75% of you. So even if you sometimes use Light Touch, well, it's the same for you guys. Same text file. We love questions, so if you could quickly flip over to number 2. That will be number 2 on the KVM switch.
Okay, number 2. Like that.
We are monitoring this Twitter feed here. So if you have questions and are afraid to just yell them and ask, you can do it through Twitter. As long as you tag it with that hashtag and preferably our names, we will be able to see it here on stage. And there might be rewards for really good questions. Might be. All right. Slides, please.
Oh, slides. Yes. I can do slides.
All right. So I talked to many Config Manager customers about why they should integrate with MDT in the first place. I mean, if you don't have Config Manager and you just need an OSD solution, fine, go ahead and use the standalone version of MDT. That's your only option if you want to go with Microsoft tools at least. OS deployment-wise, they can do the same. But the reason you normally buy a management platform is also to do management. Light Touch can't help you with that because Light Touch will leave you at deployment day. Then Light Touch is completed. Now, so if you have Config Manager, why bother? Why adding stuff that appears to actually add complexity to an already somewhat big platform? Well, no, you can't answer. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It actually reduces complexity because MDT adds 280 additional features enhancements for OSD to Config Manager. So my only recommendations to you guys is before you start customizing stuff on your own, on your Config Manager platform, download the MDT stuff and see if the stuff that you're trying to do is not already in there, because most likely it is. My favorite story, and I did that, we did a pre-conf Monday, I did a session on Tuesday. We had a customer spending days writing scripts so that Config Manager could deal with regional settings, because it doesn't have that built in, really. And then I come and show them, well, yeah, I know you spent 4 days with it, and very nice script. And I know that you were 3 people doing that, very nice. But you could also download this free script that was already written, supported, and tested by Microsoft. So now, which is more complex, spending 12 man days writing scripts or download existing supported stuff? I would argue and say downloading existing stuff is better. So out of those 280 features, can I have my screen back, please?
You can have your screen back.
So out of these 200 additional stuff, I would like to mention 3. 1, you get a development framework. Ready-made code snippets, about 35,000 lines of VB script code already there that you can steal with pride, copy and paste and use in your own code. So instead of doing a 400-line VB script to talk to an external database, it's a one-liner to call a ready-made piece of code that you can use. So it's simply, if you want to do customizations on Config Manager or Light Touch, you get much for free in here, ready-made code that you can reuse. The second thing is that you actually get an MDT database. This is an optional SQL database that you can use to store OSD-related stuff. Because quite frankly, Config Manager doesn't really have that built in. They don't have a special table or a database or views that are OSD-specific only. But the database that you use here, you can attach to the Config Manager environment, and you can use that to store OSD stuff with it. And yes, you get the license to use it with the normal SQL you use for Config Manager. And there is no risk of having it on the primary site server, because it's only being used at deployment time. It's very small. It's only a few hundred megs. So if you do profiling, you will see that Config Manager is using like 99.95% of the load, and this one is doing like 0.05% of the load. So you can just add it to the same server. And the final piece, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of time today, is you have this that is called, if I spell it correctly, it adds dynamic deployments. It allows you to have a sequence that will behave differently. For example, if I deploy it to this hardware, to this site, to this department, in this country, instead of having 10, 15, 20 different sequences, I can have a separate solution that feeds instructions to the sequence. For example, I can use it to build a list of applications that I'm going to deploy as part of my deployment. So I can have the sequence, instead of statically adding apps into it, I can have the engine figuring out that you're on HP hardware, you're supposed to have these 2 HP apps. You belong to this department, another 5 apps. You belong in this country, another 3 apps. So 3 different dynamic rules to generate a larger list of apps that I simply inject into the sequence and say to the sequence, hey, please go ahead and deploy this for me. So,
which in the end means that we started out many years ago trying to convince people you only need a few images. So we got everybody, every deployment solution that we've been working with has a few images, but now they have instead 45 task sequences to manage. That's not really easy. I mean, it should go hand in hand. A few images and a few task sequences, especially if Microsoft is going to do what it looks like they are doing, getting faster releases. That means custom code is going to be much harder to maintain because you're going to need to rewrite it every time there's a new version. Therefore, supported solution will be easier to manage.
So this is a very short example of a dynamic text file that you can feed into the sequence that will cause the sequence to behave differently. This ini file will cause the normal config manager sequence to, for all machines, it will deploy Office and Acrobat Reader, the Acrobat Reader and Office applications in config manager 2012. You can also do packages if you still use them, but then you have to do packages 001 instead of applications. So everybody gets Office and Adobe. Then we are using one of the built-in functions, one of the 280 built-in functions that will detect if this is a laptop or a desktop. And if it's a laptop, I will also install the Cisco VPN client. I will enable BitLocker, and I will put the machine into the laptop's OU. If it's a desktop, however, I will not install BitLocker. I will put it in the desktop's OU on my server in my Active Directory. So shorthand story, by using a simple text file with this logic, the sequence will now behave differently depending if I deploy a laptop or a desktop. And the coolest thing is we can simulate this. Like you can do with applications in Config Manager 2012, where you can simulate the deployment without actually doing it to make sure you got the requirement rules right and all that. We can do the same stuff with OSD. And that you can only do if you have the MDT integration. Without it, you will have to deploy a full sequence, wait that 45 minutes up to an hour, and then realize, oh, crap, wrong OU. Oh, wrong applications. Wrong computer name. But with this text file, you can simply run a simulation in 10 seconds flat, or maybe 7. It will do a simulation of the deployment. And then you can open up the result in a log file. Or you can watch it on the console if you like consoles. But I think it's easier to open it up in CM Trace. Because what we will see here that in the beginning, it learns that I have 12 network cards, which is normal in a laptop. But it actually learns stuff about the machine. It learns that it's an HP 8540, that serial number, that much memory, which is also normal for a laptop. And it learns that it's a laptop. Because in the background has been a WMI script calling chassis types to figure out this is a laptop. Or it could be a desktop, could be a server. It's not UEFI enabled, and I'm not running on battery. So for example, I could use this property to say, if you are running on battery, abort the sequence. Because otherwise you will be in a fun moment if you try to do a deployment and in the middle, the battery dies. It's sort of easier to actually stop it up front and say, hey, please plug in your power cord. But this is a laptop, and later in the sequence here, you will actually see that it figured out that it was a laptop and put it in that OU and added that application. So all in all, it built an array of 3 apps that it will feed into the sequence and say to the sequence to install these 3 apps. But the difference between a normal sequence and this integration is this is dynamically. This is being generated and fed into. And this allows you to reduce the number of sequences that you have. And of course, we can do this one more step beyond. So if you go back to PowerPoint.
I can go back to PowerPoint.
Woohoo. And enter, please.
Enter.
That was my next. That was my demo.
Okay.
And now it's advanced stuff. And next.
Okay.
And it's your demo.
Okay. So that means
we don't like slides too much, but they're good for a reference when you download them later on, but we like live demos more. And I mean, what could possibly go wrong in a live demo, right?
Nothing. So the magic Jan is talking about is the gather process. That is what makes this tick, actually. The gather process collects a lot of things, and we can use all that information as variables in different ways. So here I have a bunch of different custom settings.ini files. And let's start with one for UDI. If you deploy UDI, maybe you want that to have different passwords for the default administrator in different locations. You want to have different settings based on certain things. So let's pop that up.
I actually got a question in the Twitter feed, which is sort of relevant. It's actually a really good question from Stefan Wiebier. excuse for the pronunciation, but Stefan Vibjör, is he here? He's over there.
Is right.
The question is, what if I want to have a different ini file and I was to pass it to the gather process? How could I do that?
Well, I'm going to show you that. So it's rather easy. So let's check this file. So every custom settings.ini file starts with settings. That's what the CTI gather script looks for. Then it looks for something called priority. And priority means in what order should I read in all these values? Default and default gateway is the order in this case. So it's going to read in this block first. In this block, we have the OS install yes, which doesn't mean anything in Configuration Manager, but it means something in Light Touch. Then we put the OS AD admin, domain name, join account, password. Then we flip down to default gateway. So based on whatever it finds in default gateway, it's going to automatically transfer that continuous reading in the file to either Stockholm or Redmond, depending on what gateway I have. So if we turn up to be in Stockholm, then of course the UI language, the keyboard locale, and the time zone name would of course be based on something that fits most people in Sweden. However, since we're running UDI, this will just be default values. The user will be able to override that value and pick something else, depending on how you configure your UDI wizard. We're also going to create a computer name, which is going to be, I wouldn't say strange, but it will be based on variables. So in this case, it's going to be PC-STH- and for anyone that has played with VB script.
Never heard of.
Right. You should recognize that as a VB script calculation. So in custom settings.ini, we can do pure calculations. Since VB is running the engine, we can do VB script calculation. So in this case, it's going to be the leftmost serial number 8 leftmost serial number to be picked as the computer name. We're also going to put it in a separate OU. And if we are in Redmond, there's going to be other things. So in Redmond, for instance, they have the super secret password of the Redmond secret password, which is, of course, the password. They use not a password. They use password, you know, with a $sign. So it's Microsoft. They always do that. So that is one way. Another thing we could do is, let's see what we can do with computer type and location. This is actually a customer that required this. He said, I would like to have a computer name based on the fact that it has a location and it's a type of computer. And we want to use a part of the serial number as that name, so we can easily track it down. Say, okay, we can do that. So in this case, it's kind of strange because the default section here states that the OSD computer name should be named by type, named by location, left serial number 8. Now, at this time, we don't have those variables in place. They don't exist. But you can see I have sections up here. And those sections is going to be, it's going to jump to those sections. So, for instance, we start with the default gateway. We find out where we are. Based on that, we then define the name of the location, which is either going to be NY or RD. Then we figure out the following. By laptop type means subsection laptop. And is laptop is either going to be true or false, which means it's going to find a section that is either true or false. And if it's true, it's going to be named by type WLT. If it's a VM, it's going to be WVM. So I want to play with this, and I want to verify that this works. So I just wrote the script. And I'm going to run my test environment, which is called test, CTI gather. And the fun thing is that all these command lines actually accepts command line parameters. So ini file, :
And that is the answer to the question from Stefan. How
Exactly.
can you specify another rules file?
So what you should know is that all the scripts you have in MDT, all of them accepts command line parameters. That means, really, do you really need to have a custom settings.ini?
You can have really long command
No,
lines.
you can have a really long command line instead. It's just going to be very, very long, but it actually works. So let's run it. And I can see this is actually working. And the reason I can see it's working is because the name now is, of course, WVM-NY. It's a virtual machine, and the gateway is obviously one of them that actually targets to New York. And my serial number is 409042. And you can see here it's trying to go through all these sections and to find things. So it actually found that it is a desktop. It's not really a desktop. So the problem here with this solution is, if you go back and check this, it's a virtual machine. The virtual machine is a desktop, but it's also a virtual machine. Therefore, I need to define the by VM type first. Otherwise, it will discover the by desktop type first. And most of these rules has one general rule, which says first writer wins. So if we determine it is a desktop, and then we determine it also is a VM, then it's still going to be a desktop. Therefore, I need to process the by VM type first. We have other things like virtual machines. This one is easy. The default says OS install no. This works in light touch. That means we can't install anything at all, except for the fact that by VM type, and it happens to be a virtual machine, OS install will be true. Therefore, we can install on a virtual machine. This is a really easy way to block. You can only install on pre-approved computers. If you try to install on something I didn't test, it's going to blow up and say no.
Show them the model one, because that's actually more commonly used.
Yeah. You mean that one?
Yes. Same storyline, but in this case, we simply say that some models, some hardware is okay to install on, but if you're not on this list, you're not allowed to be installed. And if you want to do this with Config Manager, because this is light touch, well, the only thing you need to do in Config Manager is take the exact same ini file, but to your sequence, you simply add a condition in the beginning. If this one is set to no or to yes, in this case no, then abort. Run the foo.vbs script that doesn't exist. It'll break the sequence and abort the process. Or you can do a nice exit. That's also, it's not as fun, but you...
No, it's more fun to just break it. So what we try to say here is that in many cases we meet customers that Johan explained. They spend weeks creating scripts. Their record so far is a guy that has spent 2 weeks writing a script that gives the computer name the serial number. Guess that he was very sad when I told him that, well, the only thing you need to do is OSD computer name equals % serial number, % and then you're done. And you go like, oh, I didn't know that. No, you never asked. That's one of the fundamentals. You really need to ask.
A common question that we get is, all right, cool, OSD computer name equals something, default gateway equals something, model equals something. Where can I find all these properties that I can use? In the help file. There is a reference section where every single property is documented these days. So, what if you want to do more stuff? What if you want to add in 500 machines instead of 2? I mean, you could do MAC address equals, and then the computer name is the PC75, another MAC address, PC76. That's okay if you have 2 computers. But if you have 2,000, I would argue and say a text file might not be the best way to list all these computers. I would say that the database is much more efficient. And especially if you do models or you do locations or you do a list of applications, you can use database tables to store that information. So can I have the screen back to number 2, please?
Number 2 is coming up, sir. There you go.
It's really complex to configure Config Manager or Light Touch to query a database because you need to have a text file. And in that text file, you simply specify the following text, which will instruct the ini file to contact this SQL server, this database using that protocol, and querying that table, which is actually a view. And it will, in the background, build a select star from computer settings where these parameters are whatever they are to be. So I have this init file which has like 7 lines of text in it. That's it. On the server side, through the deployment workbench, on my config manager server, I have installed the database. It's really complex because you need to right-click and say new, and then it's a 4-step wizard, and then you're done. And then, as you can see, I have added a few machines in here. I have right-clicked and added new machines. I have specified them on a per MAC address, but if you don't want to do MAC address as identifier, you can do asset tag, UID, serial number, or the MAC address. The most commonly used ones are these two. So I'm adding my machines into the database. I have also created a role. So I have an accounting role here, for example. And a role is just a group of settings, a list of settings. And in this list of settings for the accounting department, I have configured some OSD properties. So for example, that if you're part of accounting, your machine is going to be in the accounting OU, and the org name is going to be accounting. I also have a few applications, the Adobe Reader in Office 2013. I can either add light touch applications in here, or I can add in Config Manager 2012 applications. In this case, there are 2012 applications. I can also add in Config Manager packages, the legacy packages, if I wanted to. And I can also, if I wanted to, I didn't do it in this case, I can add in accounts that are supposed to be local admin accounts on this machine when it's being deployed. But this role has a few settings. And then I can take that role and I can connect that role with a machine. So I can add one or more roles to that computer entry that I have. And then I can go back and test this. So I can go back to my test environment on the right server. Here we go. I run the gather, and again, this gather script or batch file is just calling the CDI gather script, and after that, I'm opening up CM trace with a log file. So I'm running gather. It will run the simulation. It will contact the database, try to figure out, all right, do I exist, do I don't exist? And then it will open up the log file for me. So now you can see that, all right, the process started. After a while, it actually built a select query based on my init file. Select star from computer settings where, and all that parameters. You can see it got one record back, and it actually returned the computer name. Check. It continued. It queried for roles belonging to that machine. It got one record back, and that was the role accounting. And the reason it did that is because my init file, I had a section that queried for roles. I have one that's querying packages and one querying applications. Go back to my init file. It found one role, found one package, and it also found, here we go, the applications from the role in the database. And eventually it will also pick up the OU later down in this list as well. Yes? So the question is, what role takes precedent if you have multiple roles? Well, first of all, the order still applies, and most properties, as Michael said, is the first writer that wins, unless it's a property that actually allows overwrite, which is like 10 properties out of 200. But in this case, if I have multiple roles, if I go back to my server and go to a machine and add another role, they will be added in that order. But you can also control order in one way by actually having, wrong one, this one here, these sections being called in different orders, that can also control the result. So you do have the option. Or you can have a stored procedure, I'm going to show that shortly, that controls the order. So instead of doing select from something, you say call this stored procedure, and that contains the logic to do stuff. So how do you do a store procedure? Well, you open up the Management Studio, and you add one in. Store procedures are being added in store procedures. And this is the cool thing about the MDT database. You are allowed and actually encouraged to extend it. If I would go into these tables and add additional fields, they will immediately, if you do a refresh of the pane, they will actually display in the UI as well. So you can add your own custom fields for stuff you want to ask about or have configured, and then it will be visible in the UI as well. So I have a store procedure, and the way this store procedure works, it actually looks for, in the database, is the machine known? If not, it will actually generate a computer name for it based on a prefix and a sequence number. And I'm using a table to keep track of those numbers. So if I open this table, you can see that the current number is 85. 84.
Yep.
The next number will be 85. Duh. And then I can go to my client again, and I can configure it to call a stored procedure. And this is very difficult because you need an ini file. And this ini file, you simply say, hey, that database, that protocol, that procedure, and you call the stored procedure. So let me run that gather again. If I close the trace, I can run it again. Do the simulation once more. But I still got that computer name. Why? Because it's known. The store procedure will only generate names if it's not known, but I had the machine in the database already, so it is known. So let me go ahead and actually make it unknown. And you can do that in two ways. You can either just delete the machine from the computer or from the database, or you can simply change the MAC address to something else that makes it sort of unknown. And then I can go back to my simulation, run the gather again, and this time you can see that computer name is now PC85 because that was the next available number in my sequence. If I go back to my sequence engine on the server and execute that again, you can see it's bumped up the version number to 85. So I'm using the database to keep track of numbers I already handed out. But the store procedure actually also injects the machine back into the database. So if I would reinstall the machine again, it will get that same 85 computer name because now it is known. Problem is, now you go back to the UI and you try to find that new machine. So you press F5 until you run out of use in your hand because it's not going to help you. You actually need to go back to the database node, hit F5, go back to computers, and then it will appear. So that's my new entry. An entry without the description because I did not configure my store procedure to inject the description. Could I change that to add that? Sure. Can I use other stuff in my sequence or in my store procedure? Where did you go, my friend?
I'm here.
Yeah, I know, but the other one.
Oh, sorry.
You can see that previously I actually added in additional stuff. I had the store procedure not only inject the computer name, but also the make and model, which is useful for those who do not have config manager. Those who are using light touch, they might want to have this as a small inventory database. If you have config manager, you already have it. No point for me for adding it in. And since I'm running this database on the site server, it's very easy for me to have a view, to have a store procedure that reaches into a config manager and actually reads that information if I so need it. I don't need to store it twice because it's already on the same server. Also, this UI that I'm using here, is this the kind of UI you would like to give to help desk? Maybe not. Luckily, Light Touch and MDT has been downloaded like 700,000 times. so you're not exactly alone on using it. So if you go to CodePlex, for example, you'll find a bunch of ready-made examples. And one of those examples is a portal to that database. It's a small HTA page that you can give to help desk that allow them to create new computers, and you can allow them to assign them with roles. It's available for free. It's pretty cool stuff. All right. What if we want to do
more?
Let me see. We need to do this correctly, which is not correctly. I'm working on this. All right, here we go. So that was SQL, demo SQL. You can call external scripts. And we have a demo on external scripts.
Oh, that's me.
Yep, that's you.
That's me.
Number one-ish.
Kind-ish. Yeah, that's me.
That looks like you.
Yeah.
Green.
I'm green.
And big. I wasn't saying Hulk, but...
Thank you. So, we know that the gather process is nice. We know that we can send information back to the database, and we can use that as a decision, right? One of the problems we have is that sometimes we need to gather other information. We need something else. We need to base the deployment based on temperature, fan speed. No, we don't do that.
You're right.
But what we could do is that maybe we got a value. Anybody deployed a Lenovo machine? Right. So then you know that they have a really nice model number with the 3 last characters describing the assembly code for that country. And we really need that.
No.
Or sometimes you can see names that really doesn't make any sense. I know vendors that has a backslash in the computer model name. Thank you so much for that. Brackets, dashes, stars, and all kinds of strange characters. I did HP, I do HP still, and sometimes you get an HP NV8240, parenthesis, hash, and a bunch of numbers. And it's like, what is that? It's the unique assembly code for that day. Thank you, I bought 500 machines. I have 500 unique machines. I really can use model. What I can do is that I can neutralize that or make them more, normalize them. And we do that by firing up something called user exit script. Now, this is one of the most commonly used user exit script. I always use it. I don't even ask the customer anymore. I just put it in. Eventually, they're going to need it anyhow, and it's already in there.
So this script works for Light Touch and Config Manager, of course, like everything else.
So a user exit script is a VB script, right? It has functions. In this case, we have a function called user exit. It's always going to be there. Then we have a function called set make alias. We use set make alias because make is not always what we really want to have as a make. So what we do is that we use the select case. So if it's a Dell Computer Corporation, a Dell Inc., a Dell Computer Corp, it's going to be a Dell. If it's a Matsushita Electrical Industrial Company .comma Ltd. It's a Panasonic. Why can't we just say that? It's a Panasonic. So we convert all these names into something that makes sense. The same goes for the model. By the model, we need to figure out different things. So in this case, we can't always use the standard procedure of just reading in the values and converting them. Sometimes we need to read in other information. In this case, we read in the computer system product. We also read in the BIOS.
Especially, for example, Lenovo, it makes more sense to ask the computer system product class rather than the normal computer system.
Yeah. So in this case, you can see that we have a select case Hewlett Packard, and the first 2 lines are removed. But then we have if your machine happens to be an NW8240, blah, 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 it's going to be an W8240.
And you can use string function to say if you discover a parenthesis, just get rid of the rest, and then you don't need to specify every single model. If you show the...
I'm just going to show this because I love that. This is IBM server. This is someone working in the BIOS team that thought he was working in the marketing team.
You know that that guy had, it had to be a guy, had a BBS back in the days and did a lot of ASCII arts in it.
No carrier BBS. I'm really cool. Everything is green text.
Modem.
Yeah, so they do all these things and we convert them. And in the case of Lenovo, this is what we do. So we can either use, if that is the version you have, then convert it into that. Or we can say, well, if we didn't specify it, just remove the last 3 characters. Other things we do.
Run this.
Yeah, I can run this. Here is for Hyper-V. Every machine you have in Microsoft environment that is virtualized is called virtual machine. Doesn't mean that you know what it is, but it's going to be a virtual machine.
So you can detect what VM you actually have, what version of Hyper-V, and you can use that as a condition to install the right integration services for it.
So in this case, you can see it's going to return values back. So here's what we got. Since it is a Microsoft corporation and the model is a virtual machine, then we query computer system product and the BIOS version. Gives us virtual 5001-223. That means it's a Hyper-V 2012 RTM. Now I can use model alias to define that you should install that integration components and things like that. In this user exit alias script, we do other things too. So user exit script is what you do to extend the gather process to get things that you need to make the decision in your dynamic deployment.
Another way to extend it is to call web services. To have a web application on the server and simply have your config manager sequence or your light touch sequence to configure that one or to ask a web service instead. All right, number 2. And I'm now going to demonstrate my massive skills in Microsoft Paint. So this is supposed to be 2 sites connected by a 4 megabit link. On the central site, or the headquarters site, this is where I have my site server running. This is a site server. And that site server has a database. And you know it's a database because it looks like, see, you can. That's a database. Now, what if I have a, don't laugh, please. Took me a long time to learn this.
Yeah, I know.
I have a client in a remote site, and I start a deployment. And I also have a distribution point on that site, of course. So that's a DP. Now, the client is going to contact the management point, get the sequence down, start to do the stuff that sequence normally do. Every time the sequence needs a package, you'll get that package from the local distribution point. But in the beginning of the sequence, it will actually go ahead and query the database for settings. Now, what protocol is being used here by default? Well, it's named pipes. That's a protocol that is almost as old as I am, and it's not very new. It's been around a while. And the reason we use this protocol is that's the only protocol that works really great in WinP. And also it's the only protocol that allows us to do a trusted connection to a database from within WinP. So that's why we use it. Problem with this protocol is that it's basically copying a file. So you need to open for file and print if you have firewalls in between. And if you have not a 4 megabit network anymore, but you have a 0.4 megabit network, this will fail.
You mean like IP over avian carriers, right?
Or pigeons, yeah. Also, if you get high latencies, named pipes will break. And those of you that know databases, you know that you can increase the timeout in the connection string. Will it help? No. It still breaks. What we can do instead is to have a web service. Let me do a web service. This is a web service. A web application that you add on your site server. The web application talks with the database, and the client talks with the web service. Now I'm switching protocol from named pipes to, any ideas? HTTP. This is probably the best protocol you can have against high latency links. And I'm also running code on the server side, so I'd be more secure. I can do stuff I normally cannot do on the client. And how difficult is it now to query a web service? Extremely difficult. You need an ini file. And now you need to do this correctly, because you actually need to type in the correct name to the web service. It won't accept any typos, so that's the downside. But if you type the name correctly, it actually calls that web service. And the cool thing about the web service is I can actually test it out on my server side. So I can open up my web browser, if I can type that correctly. It's coming. Mm-hmm. And I can say, all right, this is my web service, has a few functions. For example, getting the computer role, getting the role list from the database. But why not get an OU list from Active Directory? I'm now running code on the server side. I can do anything. And why not add a machine into a config manager collection? Or why not delete it from config manager? I'm pretty sure that most of you here that runs config manager at some point in time had tried the deployment and it failed, and you wanted to try it immediately again just to realize, crap, the computer is now known, so now you need to go into the console, you need to find the unknown object, you need to delete it. Or you simply have an ini file that calls a web service. You do this from the boot image. So if I start the deployment once again, it will reach into the web config manager and just delete the account for me from the client side by calling a web service that is running on the server side. So, and I can combine this. I can take the light touch wizard in the right command prompt. That's the wrong one because it's gray, meaning a normal user. An admin, helps to be on the right computer. So I can run the light touch script, but I have modified it with a single pane instead of multiple panes. The first fields, the first three, are being read from the MDT database, the computer name and the role it's supposed to have. This drop-down is coming from the web service that talks to Active Directory and populates this in real time. The final one is giving me not images, actually, even though it says images. These are actually collections in Config Manager. So if I select any of these collections, it's going to put the machine in that collection. Of course, I have deployed sequences to those collections, but they are currently empty. But this one calls a web service that adds it. So if you want to test this again, you can go back to the server. You can test, for example, the get OU list that will give you OU lists from Active Directory in an XML file. That's how the communication is done. HTTP post and get by a simple XML file. And if you don't like to code web services yourself, you can actually reuse stuff that other idiots have done. Yeah, it's mine. This, for example, is the code to get the OU list. It's available on Codeplex. If you search for pretty good frontend, you find it. In fact, if you go to Codeplex and simply search for MDT, you will find a lot of cool stuff. For example, the MDT admin tool I showed you before, it's available on Codeplex to modify the database. Or why not the MDT customizations? some 150 plus ready-made web services created by German fellow MVP Mike Koster, divided into MDT database stuff, config manager stuff, Active Directory stuff. For example, if I go into Active Directory stuff, this is a good one. Why don't call a web service that adds the machine into a group? I mean, many of you probably assign applications to groups. And this is how you have the deployment actually put the machine into the right group during deployment. Or why not this? This is favorite as well. Why not move the machine into the correct OU? Maybe you have a staging OU, or you are in a deployment project and you want to change the OU that the machine already is, but you want to keep the computer name. Then you can call this function that actually moves it between OUs. So, I mean, that's dead serious. It's easy as pie. You simply install Visual Studio, you learn C#, and then you get going. Right?
No, not
really. Could it be that it actually are easier way? Could it be that?
Could it be that? Yes, it could be.
And the magic word is orchestrator.
Orchestrator. So how many of you are today either having orchestrator installed, thinking of it, or playing with it, trying, testing, play? That's good. That's good. Because instead of building web services, we can do runbooks, which is very nice. And then you can start, or you can actually finish it too. What we try to do here is that what we see people doing, and I know because I work as an administrator for a long time for a company, and the comment that I always got from the technician was, when I asked, is the machine ready? Yeah. So we can put it in production? Almost.
Sort of.
Sort of. So what do you mean with that? There's a few things I need to fix first. So it's not ready. Yeah, it's ready. It's just not ready for real. That's not ready. That's not finalizing. So
before I just have to do this question.
Question?
The question is, if you're writing a web service, do you do it in C# or if you do it in VB.NET?
Ooh.
Of course, I'm doing it in C#.
So that is a political discussion.
Mike, the other Mike, is doing in VB.NET, but we're still friends. But
not that
it's
good
just
friends.
a matter of preference. It really doesn't matter. You simply learn one language and you normally stick with it, and I happen to learn C#, so I stick with it. But a web service is a standard. It can be written in most languages that accepts, web apps.
Before we dig into the web services, I just want to give you a short demo of running PowerShell within the task sequence, because that's another nice way of doing it. And I do have a very simple PowerShell script, and it's extremely simple. It's called demo, and I want to open it with Notepad, of course. And you can do PowerShell within them. And when you do that, you remember the CTI gather process, collects all the variables so you can use them. Well, you can use them even in your PowerShell script. It's all about using the TS-env, the TS environment, and that gets loaded. So all these things, it's doing nothing, it's just writing, but as you can see, I can just type computer name is OSD computer name, things like that, right?
We got a very important question. I was about to save it until Niel, but I could not stop myself.
Okay.
It's from Michael Freistetter. Is he in the room? Michael Freistetter?
He's in the back, of course.
You're a fast runner.
I'm doing a demo here.
The question is, where can we find all the scripts that we demo on stage? They are already available for download on our blogs, and you get the link in the end, but it's quite easy to remember because he's the bunny, deploymentbunny.com. I'm more order, so I'm deploymentresearch.com. That's where you have the scripts, and they are already there because we uploaded them Monday this week. So, Michael,
so there you are.
Nice book.
So this is easy, but let's assume that you really want to play with this. You want to see what kind of variables I actually have in PowerShell. So I want to, be able to play with them. Well, that's not that hard. The only thing you need to do is that you need to load up the environment. You load up the environment by running a task sequence that looks like this. I do a gather process. I run the bogus PowerShell script that doesn't contain anything, but when I do so, it's automatically going to create folders for all the PowerShell modules to be loaded, and then I create a pause. The pause is a VB script that says message box OK, so it doesn't really do anything at all. You run this, not that one.
I wasn't quite paying attention to what you were talking about, but we test this in Light Touch because it's quick and fast, even if the intention is to use it later on in Config Manager. Because every time you do a change in Config Manager, it takes a while. With Light Touch, it's instant. Yeah. So you can do testing like 10 times in 10 minutes.
Yeah, so Light Touch is just a playground in this case.
Yes.
So I'm going to run the runbook that doesn't do anything at all.
Ta-da.
Ta-ta.
It's coming. It's
waiting for
sorrowing. It's very thoroughly doing stuff.
Or nothing, or something, or... That's the first one. Fire it up again.
Again, what could possibly go wrong in
a live demo? I already loaded up the environment, but here you can see I'm in C:/CS demo, but I did a directory search for TS environment, and that gives me the information back. So here's all the variables that you now can use in your PowerShell script directly by specifying $TS env : and then the name of the variable, which is really
down there.
Yeah, so let's try to do that again. Next. Live demos. I hate that. It could be because I've loaded up the environment. Are you going to touch the... What are you doing? Oh, you're going to see if I'm running a...
Script engine, yes.
Not running a script engine. Just a monitor.
Huh. Cool enough.
Yeah. So running PowerShell scripts is nice, but let's assume that you want to have some kind of scenarios. Let's say that you need to replace a computer. So we replace a computer, the old computer is supposed to be dead, right? Makes sense, right? So what do you need to do after you have replaced that computer? Here's the old one. Do you need to do anything at all? You need to clean up Active Directory. You need to clean up agents. You need to clean up Configuration Manager. That account is still in there. It's funny when I go to a customer, they have 6,000 employees and 35,000 computers in Active Directory. You don't really do maintenance here, do you? No, we never clean it up. So when you do reports, it's going to tell you have a bunch of dead machines. Yeah, we can't trust the reports. I understand that. Now, I'm not going to do a complete environment deployment, but the only thing I need to do is that I need to create a runbook that looks like this. It reads data, that's initialized data, find the computer, moves the computer, and disable the computer account. Then I can have another runbook that runs on a schedule every month that says for every computer that has been disabled in this OU for more than 90 days, delete them. So it gives me a safety time period, right? So the properties here says read in OSD computer name and read in something called Boneyard. Boneyard is not really a reserved word, but it's a place where you place old computers.
Archive could be a name as well.
Yeah, I think Boneyard is more fun. Then we do an Active Directory integration. So I'm going to pick the get computer from the Active Directory integration pack. And in the properties, I do a connection to Active Directory, and I do a filter. And the easiest filter you can do is based on the SAM account name. The SAM account name is going to be the computer name, except for one small detail. You need to add a $sign in the end. Then you got the computer name. Then we could filter this and say the only time you should run this is actually when you really have a computer name. So how do I know if I have a computer name? Well, instead of doing get computer, I can do count and say if the value is 1, then you should continue running that runbook. Otherwise, you shouldn't. So if you get 0, there's no point of trying to move the computer. It's going to fail and say, couldn't move it, right? And if you got 2 counts back on the same name, then you have a serious problem in Active Directory, and you should try to reinstall it. Then you move the computer, so properties, and here we have the same connection to Active Directory, and I have the computer distinguished name, which is picked up from get computer, and the new computer location is, of course, from initialized data. And it's all about right-clicking and say subscribe. So this is like building a web services, playing with Lego Duplo. You know, the big blocks when you're like 3 years old. I'll take a blue one and a red one, and oh, it's cool. So it's pretty much that hard. And then we disable the count. Now, the size of this runbook is the average size that I see most people do when they do connections with operating system deployment runbooks. When you start building runbooks that turns into the snake, you're doing it wrong. In that case, you should build multiple runbooks and have a runbook running other runbooks instead. Otherwise, it's going to be too complicated. So how do I then use this? Well, I create it, I need to check it in, and I need to go into the task sequence. Here's the replace demo. And this is a fake sequence, since we can't be here for an hour waiting for a machine to be deployed. So we're going to do gather, and then we're going to execute the runbook. And the only thing you need to do is browse. So you browse to your orchestrator runbook server. And it's going to take a while. It's a French-Canadian product from the beginning, and they never hurry in anything. So the question is, does this work for CCM as well? Yes, it does. It actually works exactly the same. The only reason I'm using light touch is because we're going to need a full day to do the demos in CCM.
Wasn't that a very good question?
It was a very good question, and that actually deserves a book. So, 2 seconds.
1, 2.
Sorry, 3,
Give me the
4.
book.
Yeah,
Who asked it?
So here you can see I have all the run books, and if I go to OSD, I can see I have the move or enable or replace cleanup.
Did you see that jump? Never mind. Go on.
Very sporty. You're not the sporty type. You can also see that it's actually using the same parameters. So as long as you use the same parameters or variables in your runbook that exists in the OSD deployment, you don't need to map them. If you're not, you need to map them. So if someone is dumb enough to instead use OSD computer name, they just use OSD computer, then it won't work. I heard. So to make this work, we also need to add the boneyard. So if I go into the rules file I have here, and let me open that in another view control. Where's it's in the production share. Control, production share, custom. Where is it? There is it, custom settings.line. Thank you. So you can see I'm running all these sections, and I'm actually adding Boneyard here. And Boneyard, of course, has a specification. So the Boneyard is that location. So that means if I run this runbook and I enter the name of whatever computer I'm supposed to move, it's going to move the computer from the whatever OU it is in now to that Boneyard OU and disable the account, which means we have a complete cleanup process. And I want to try this. And here I have a computer named PC999. And of course that is supposed to be replaced. And you can see it's in the workstation OU. And we would like it to end up in the Boneyard OU. So let's hope this works. I'm just going to see that we don't have any leftovers. Let's remove that just to be sure. Gone. And switch back here. And here.
Michael, before you do that,
I need to fake the computer name, right? Yes.
Can you get me the screen?
Uh-huh. That's going to be number 2, right?
While Michael was doing that, I went to Michael's blog, downloaded the PowerShell script he had. I added it to a special sequence with a super secret sauce working PowerShell sequence.
Thank you so much.
Which you can see simply have that PowerShell script running as an action. And if I go to my client, my working client, and run the light touch script, log in as a super admin. Oh. No, you log in as a normal user account. Of course.
So now I can see my demo running on your machine.
Yep.
That's gonna be
so you can see it's running gather, and shortly it will kick off the PowerShell script, which is now doing inventory, and then it will actually kick off and find the makes, the models, and all that Michael demonstrated in that list. So make is now Corporation Microsoft, model is VM, and we have a progress at 99% just because we can, and we're done.
Yeah.
So that's how you call a PowerShell script.
You're always supposed to wait at 99%, right?
Yeah.
Everybody else does that, so we can do that too.
So it's quite easy to call a PowerShell script if you know how you do it. You may continue.
Thank you so much. So hopefully this will work then, right? So
shall I go to your blog already, or?
You can prepare for it. So let's do the...
I have some water instead.
The disable demo. So let's run that. Hopefully it's running. Yes, it's running.
Woo!
So it's running through all the scripts, and you're going to see in the end it's going to execute the orchestrator runbook. And you can see that happening on this machine too. If you go into the log, you can see it actually starts doing, it's getting the computer name. And hopefully it's going to find the computer name. It's a big Active Directory.
Yeah.
Not really. And it succeeded. So if we go back to the domain controller and go to workstation, you can still see it there, but if we do a refresh, it's kind of gone. And if I go into the Boneyard, you can see it's going to be there. So by doing this, you can add things. Like, think of this. You're doing Configuration Manager. You put a machine in a collection, right? After that machine has been deployed, you want to move that from that deployment collection to another collection because it's actually an accounting machine. So you move it to another collection. And you can continue doing all that, the small things you normally do. So you really can do and say, well, the machine is deployed. So it's really done, and I don't need to add that small manual.
I have a question for you guys. How many of you are here in this room because you grew up with Lego? Orchestrator is Lego. It's coding for IT pros. You can build really advanced web services without a single line of C#. Drag, drop, puzzle, do things. Yes, sir, in the red shirt. Oh, gee.
So the question is about licensing.
There is a licensing booth, right?
Thank you for this session. The problem with licensing is, number one, they constantly change it. So whatever we say, it's not going to be accurate after 5 minutes anyhow.
The current shorthand version of licensing for Orchestrator is if the Orchestrator runbook touches a machine, you need a license for it. In this case, we didn't touch a machine other than the domain controller. So you would need a license for the domain controller. But this has been sort of a very...
You really need to check with the person that gives you the best answer. and then you make he or she write that down so you can have it as an evidence. That's the way. So if I get bad answers, I continue asking until I get the correct answer that I like, and then I use that.
Now, the problem with Orchestrator has been quite difficult in terms of licensing, and we do not have the perfect answer for you, but it's solvable at least if you talk to the licensing account manager that you have. So, yeah, it's a good question, though. Unfortunately, I'm out of books. Otherwise, you would have been given one. All right. Thank you, sir. Now, as I said before, if you go to this page, this web page, you will find resources, videos, commercial as well as free videos, trainings, books that are all related to the stuff we have done here. You will also find links to the 25-some resources that me and Michael actually normally go to find additional information around deployment, OSD, and config manager and such. And of course, we have our own blogs there as well, where you can download all the scripts and all the stuff that we have been showing here today on stage. And of course, as usual, there is a bunch of additional sessions here at TechEd, and they are recorded, so you can review them even if they have been presented already. And we have been very kindly asked to not forget this slide. Please, please, please fill in the evals. As always, be honest but gentle. And thank you for taking your time.
Thank you so much.
Take care.